You're listening to If Only I Were Wiser podcast, where Raina Wilson brings together wisdom and raw life stories to provide encouragement and truth. So many times it's easy to become discouraged in your own pursuit of health because your story or circumstances look drastically different from your favorite influencer or even the expectations you had for yourself. If that is you, welcome! This space is for you to learn, breathe, and maybe just listen and see what wellness could look like for you. Hey friends, welcome back to the If Only I Were Wiser podcast. On today's episode, I have PJ Harlow, founder and CEO of PJ Harlow Wellness. PJ is a certified holistic health practitioner and virtual and holistic mold consultant specialized in working with environmentally sensitive and symptomatic individuals. Her unique philosophy embodies a methodical and holistic approach by working to rebuild and regenerate the organic balance and natural microbial diversity within our indoor spaces. In this episode, PJ shares her own story of healing from mold toxicity as well as how that's impacted her current clients and ways to really heal and make our spaces the best environment we can live in. This was an incredibly interesting and so important conversation, so let's go ahead and dive in. Hey PJ, welcome to the If Only I Were Wiser podcast. I've been really looking forward to this conversation because it's a little more personal now to really dive into this topic.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really stoked. And I look forward to kind of talking about, what's been happening with you and kind of just having a real kind of fun time. But maybe this can be a learning type of episode for everybody. But I love sharing on this topic because I feel like I have a very unique perspective and expertise in the industry. So, but I'm really excited to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
For sure. Before we dive into quite actually the nitty gritty, can you just share a little bit about your family? What does life look like for you right now? All of the fun, juicy things outside of mold.
Absolutely. So we live on the East Coast. We live in Delaware, and I have 4 kids. I'm married. Most of my kids are grown. All of my girls. I have 3 girls and 1 boy, and my son is a senior and about to graduate, and he's definitely the hardest kid, the only boy, the baby. But besides my career in mold, right now we're kind of in this transitional period, where I feel like things are just different in the house. I was even saying this the other day in my stories on Instagram that, I used to have to cook these big meals, because we had family and
right.
And now it's kind of like my son's never here or he's working and it's just me and Pete, and we kind of both have different diets. And so it's just transitioning into this kind of different stage of life where I can actually give a little bit more attention to myself. And so that was a little bit hard at first because I was just so used to, as parents, we kind of get so used to just giving of ourselves,
right.
selflessly, like just take everything I have. So, I had to fight my own guilt of being like, it's okay to, be selfish with yourself, at least for a little bit. So, but yeah, that's kind of like what my life's looking like. I'm working on the company is kind of like my absolute passion. PJ Harlow Wellness is my passion project. And I've never really had like a big passion throughout my life. It was the one thing that I was really missing. And my husband, we used to kind of joke like, PJ has no passion. I liked things, but I just didn't feel like just, super energetic and right. wanting to put all my energies into it. And so, I never thought that mold would be my thing, but, and the company, but, I really love kind of helping people learn this and kind of turning people's I guess, their fears and kind of changing that into feeling confident and educated and kind of making them understand the reality of it. But I spend a lot of time, it's a lot of dedication and commitment that, because I'm also kind of like a recovering perfectionist. And so I have to, I'm learning how to delegate.
Yeah. That's so hard though.
Isn't it?
I think in this like digital social media age too. I've recently taken a position at my church and I am the delegatee, I guess. But I think like there are so many ways that by delegating the things that you're excited about, it gives somebody else the place to serve you. And I've actually found so much joy in the receiving end of that, of like, yes, like let me have more so that I can grow myself. So that's a side note, but definitely a skill I've had to learn over the years. Not in a beautiful way either.
I can understand that because it's been something very difficult for me to do. Kind of, I've had to really separate and kind of sit and say, okay, what is like CEO work, and the way I did it was I kind of tried to give myself a wage of like what I feel if I were to charge someone per hour, what would that be? And would I pay someone else that much money to do this task? And that's kind of really helped me to kind of separate and say, okay, well, my assistant can handle that. And so we're in that part too. There's a lot of stuff going on. So
yeah, that's super exciting though.
Yeah, thanks.
Wow. Okay, so let's dive in. It's kind of a broad topic in general, so you'll be the one to gracefully navigate this, because this has even just like been my own part of my story recently. But long story short, we live in military housing. My husband and I have not felt great in this house since we got here. We've been here for about 2 years. We finally got someone out here to do their job. There was a whole big argument about who didn't do their job when they pulled up our floors, and it was nasty underneath. But to the Army, like there are several major like $1 million lawsuits for our military base right now going on with housing just in general. So the process for us has been basically like, there's mold in your house, but we can't even tell you that it's mold because we'll get in trouble. They kicked us out for 3 weeks to have an abatement team come and do whatever they needed to do. They said they were going to excavate whatever they needed to kind of do as precautionary care. I have no idea what they did. We're home now. We have an air doctor. So that has been kind of our first step. But my husband and I have seen like our PCM, our primary care managers, over the past couple months. He's the service member, so he's a little bit more taken care of as he should be, because they bought his body to the Army, Yeah. But my PCM kind of just dismissed it as anxiety and postpartum depression. Come to find out, literally 2 weeks later, I was like, well, I know a little bit more about some of these health things because I've done some of my own research. And I was like, all of the symptoms like I've brought to you line up with mold. So I don't think I'm just depressed. Thank you, though.
That symptom, postpartum depression, is very frequently kind of tagged as like, oh, that's what it is. And I have so many women come to me like later on, and they're like, that's what I thought it was, or that's what I was diagnosed with. And certainly it could be both. Two things though, but just wanted to comment that we see that really often.
Yeah. So that's perfect. Can you start off by saying, like, to a layman, I came in literally with what I had on the internet and what research I did for myself, but like the understanding of, I think, mold in general, or like a working definition that we can move forward with.
Sure. And this might be a long definition. There's kind of like the really simplistic definition of mold, which is mold is a form of fungi that grows and spreads on damp and wet organic material that is it's working to decay. I have a very unique and kind of a, I guess, respectful view of mold after everything that I've been through. It's a fascinating organism. And most people are kind of afraid of mold, and we'll kind of talk about that, I'm sure, a little bit later. And most people are kind of like, ooh, yuck, kill it.
Right.
You know, that's our like immediate instinct is like, kill it, get rid of it. But, you know, really, when we look at what we are, you know, we are humans, obviously, but we are made up of multiple different microbiomes that contain all different kinds of microbes, bacteria, fungi, yeasts, protozoa, parasites, you know. And when we kind of take that and we look at our homes too, you know, mold is everywhere. There's mold spores everywhere. And that may seem, again, a little bit scary, like, ooh, I don't know if I want to know this, but truly it's everywhere. It would be impossible to create an environment where there is no mold. But it's not all here to harm you. As I said, its main job in life is to recycle, to decay organic matter. And so when I look at it, you know, I think of it more as like it's a natural part of life. You know, it's like that recycler. And, you know, ultimately, we don't want mold growing in our homes. Like, that's not what we certainly want. But, you know, I think I try to help people kind of take the focus off the microorganism, kind of put it onto the terrain a little bit, instead of, oh, let's try to wipe out all the mold spores in the world. It's more like, let's prevent your house from having moisture areas, because it's almost kind of like, I feel like the you know, most molds and bacteria come from the soil. And what have we done to our soils? We've destroyed our soils, you know, kind of spraying them with glyphosate, and, you know, which is ultimately like the antibiotic properties, you know, a toxin. And so we've almost kind of like destroyed mold's home. And so I kind of feel like, you know, I certainly don't have proof of this. It's my theories, but in a way, it's almost like mold is homeless. You know what I mean? And so here we are building these homes that are, you know, made of mold food. And then when it gets wet, you know, why wouldn't mold grow? You know, but it's more about understanding that and kind of understanding that you'll never have a mold-free home. And there's a certain amount that we consider to be normal, but there's kind of like the pendulum swings the other way. You know, you're never going to get rid of it completely, but we don't want molds to grow, because then that's when we start to see problems. When people have water damage, moisture intrusion, condensation issues, insulation problems, poor HVAC design, because that's creating that attractive terrain for those more pathogenic molds to grow, because they're like, oh, we're going to break this down, recycle it. So I hope that that's kind of like part of the view that I like to give people, to help them kind of understand the cycle of how it all works and why it grows, and what some of what's considered normal. Because, you know, you're going to have some mold in your drains. You're going to have some mold in your dishwasher, or anywhere where there's water. There's going to be mold and bacteria. But again, it's trying to keep that balance. But that's what mold is. People also call mildew mold too, just to break that myth. It's the same thing. It's just a different word.
Oh, nice. Good to know. Yeah, that was super helpful. So is it true then, and maybe I'm getting this completely wrong, but it's like based on like the air quality outside, if your environment has, I think they told us like if there's less mold outside or equal to the mold in your house, like we're not going to do anything.
So right now, and I'll get there, but let me preface for a sec. So right now in the mold industry, which really isn't that old, the mold industry kind of came up in the 90s. And so as far as like industries are concerned, it's a pretty young industry. You go outside of the US, there's not really mold inspectors or mold remediators. It just really doesn't exist. But my point of telling this kind of part of the story is that the industry is in the very kind of beginning stages of dividing. And there's the traditional side, and then there's the more evolved side. And it's probably like 98% traditional, 2% evolved. The difference being that the 98%, you know, the way that they measure the success of a job, you know, whether it's removing mold or treating mold, and I did air quotes for those just listening, the way that they measure that is by the appearance of the structure or whatever it is. Did we make it appear like it's been removed? Does it look good? Did we paint over it? Did we, encapsulate it in? How do we just make it appear like the problem's gone? Well, on the other side, the other 2%, we understand that you can't see microorganisms with the naked eye. So I don't know how you're going to measure how you removed all the mold by looking at it.
Because you painted it.
Yeah, totally. But we're more on the side of like understanding the health risks of exposure to that mold and the fragments it produces and the mycotoxins that it can possibly produce. So with that said, when you're talking about the outside versus the inside, in the traditional side of the industry, there is no absolute like rules. It's kind of like everybody says it's the wild, wild west. And it's definitely like that in the industry. But the standard testing that they use to gauge mold exposure is air sampling. And that's where they are constantly kind of looking at, well, let's look at your outside air and compare that to your inside air. Well, to me, it's almost like, how is that even a scientific comparison? Like you know what I mean? Like, because there could be a million mold spores outside and that's not going to affect you because you're outside, right? But if you had a million mold spores inside, you'd be totally sick, you know, in some sense. And so even when they do that, you know, it's just not an accurate comparison, even in the aspect that, you know, air testing is very limited. I'm not saying that it's not a test I would never use at all, but when you're trying to gauge the health of the home and to try to understand like what are the occupants being exposed to, here's kind of the problems that I have with that type of testing. So when we look at what really makes you sick, is it mold spores, right? Because you always hear everybody saying mold spore this and mold spore that. And this, if in a very simple example, if we were talking about trees versus mold and we were looking to see if you had any evidence of trees in your house, air testing would be like, we're only going to test for acorns. That's it. Not the roots, not the branches, not the bark, not the leaves, just acorns. Okay. And it won't even be able to tell you that this is like, I don't know, a northeastern oak hickory acorn. I know nothing about trees. Sorry, tree people. But it would just literally, it can only give you the genus. It can't give you the species. And so there's tons of like aspergillus, which is a genus of mold. there's some that are really harmful, and then there's some that are not. And so it's only looking at the spores that are floating around in your air. That's it. So it's really limited in that sense versus, there's other testing out there that can actually look at the DNA, which can show you the roots, the bark, the branches, the leaves, in that kind of analogy. Even it's unfortunate that has not evolved yet. And so, a lot of these guys out there that are traditional, many of them, they think that they really are doing the right thing. I don't think like everybody's nefarious or that everybody's intentionally doing things wrong. They really think that like this is the best practice and this is the best way, but really it's not. And, that's part of what we're working to change, is to help people truly understand that mold can be very dangerous, and when we look at, okay, what really makes you sick? It's not just spores. When you talk about a mold colony, they will produce spores as just part of their metabolic processes. They're going to just be kind of eating, whatever surface they're growing on. And it's kind of a messy process too. And in that, they're going to kind of be releasing spores, kind of like how a dandelion turns into the little puffball and releases the seeds. That's the same type of thing. And additionally, the colony will be kind of releasing fragments at the same time. And fragments are like little broken pieces of the colony, the mycelium, the root structure. And so these fragments are dangerous because they're really, really, really tiny, like submicron size tiny, smaller than HEPA, right? And these, along with mycotoxins, which are basically like kind of like a vapor, just like when we digest our food, right? Our pancreas produces enzymes to help us, break down our food, and we have kind of secondary byproducts of our digestion. We burp, we pass gas, right? And mold kind of does the same thing. And the vapors that they create are mycotoxins, and mycotoxins are secondary metabolites, kind of like, it's not, they're not alive. It's a toxin, basically. So you can't kill it. And some molds create multiple mycotoxins. Some molds don't create any. They might do it, half the day. They might do it only for an hour, or they could be doing it 24 hours a day. It really just depends on like what's happening. They also create mycotoxins when they need to defend themselves. And this is really important. And this kind of goes into why we don't kill mold. Because when mold feels threatened, whether it's from a bacteria or another yeast or another microorganism, another fungi, that, they're kind of all fighting for the same resources, water, basically they can start creating mycotoxins as a way to defend their colony. It's almost like how a snake has venom, mold has mycotoxins. They can also do this, with chemicals, and that's kind of like, most people are like, go get the bleach, go get the ammonia, like kill it, get the vinegar,
kill them all.
Get the essential oils, like whether it's non-toxic or not, it can still put mold in that state of threat. So we never want to do that. But what I was saying, they create these fragments, and they also create mycotoxins, which you can absorb into your skin, you can inhale them, you can eat them. And this is what causes that inflammatory response in the body. So when you have mold growing in your home, if you have some kind of water damage somewhere, this is the risk of that. And so when you're testing, and back to kind of talking about that air test is not going to be able to pick up those little tiny fragments. It'll only pick up spores. And if it's a really wet mold, like Stachybotrys or Cotomium, which grow where there's like, plumbing type leaks, where there's real severe water damage, those spores are not really going to get airborne because they're really wet and heavy. So unless you're like right on top of it, it's very rare. So many times when inspectors come in and kind of assess and do an air sample, it comes back normal. And, many people are told like, oh, don't worry about it. Your house is good. Like there's nothing going on, when really it's just because, again, we're only looking at the acorns and not the whole picture. So I know that was a really long-winded answer to your question.
No. So would a moisture test, because I'm thinking, from our own experience, we had somebody come in and the first guy they sent was a moisture guy. And he came in with like his little radar gun. But even then, I feel like like you said, I never would have thought mold is like an actual organism, which is so fascinating to me now. But depending on the environment, the type, everything else, it's going to react like its own organism.
Yeah, moisture measuring with like a moisture meter or even an infrared camera, that those two can be very valuable tools. But it's kind of like a surgeon. The tools don't make the surgeon good. It's the surgeon that works with his tools, and this is the same thing with an inspector. But you can find areas that, are wet and active leaks and things like that, even active kind of air leaks and things like that, that's another kind of thing that is a common misunderstanding, is that mold's only going to grow where there's like a toilet overflowing or, some kind of leak. But many areas that we see in inspections are from condensation formation, high humidity, things, even just having leaks in your house, because when that hot air and the cool air, when they hit, and there's that temperature differential, just like when you take a soda outside on a hot day, the can kind of starts to condense because it's that temperature differential there. But as far as one of the weaknesses of only looking at areas where there's moisture is, well, what if this was an old colony? What if this water damage happened 3 years ago and nobody ever did anything, nobody ever found it, let's just say, and you move in, that mold's still there, it died, or some can go dormant, it died, it lost its water source, it still has its toxic properties, it still has its allergenic properties. In fact, dead mold can be more dangerous than living mold is, because it's more easily able to get airborne. That, you kick on the AC and there's all this pressure in your home that we don't even really pay attention to, but there's all this movement, and that constant airflow starts to break away, kind of like this flower arrangement behind me. When this dies, it's going to become brittle. And if I move it, it's going to break into little pieces everywhere. And this is kind of what happens to an old colony. And those little pieces get into your air and you breathe them in, and, it gets into your dust. And that's kind of, that consistent exposure, very much like cigarette smoke. It's kind of like being exposed to those small particulates day after day. It is going to consistently affect you. And can make some people sick. Some people it doesn't. It doesn't make them symptomatic. We can talk about that a little bit later.
Yeah.
But for many people it does, especially women and children seem to get affected the most.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I'm super curious about, I think, the spectrum of symptoms. Like you said, if we have a spectrum of mold's capacity for toxicity, then I would assume there's a capacity for symptoms that develop depending on, I guess, your exposure.
And I'll kind of even tell part of my own story of because it's very aligned with this very topic. In my own house, I was the first one to get sick. And, at the time I had no idea what was happening. And I spent about a year trying to figure out what are all of these mystery symptoms and did all of this testing. But it started with my hands hurting. And I originally thought that I had carpal tunnel from typing so much because I worked in an office. And then my knees started to hurt and my ankles and my feet, the bottoms of my heels and the tops of my feet. And then I was like, okay, this is weird. Like I'm getting joint pain all over. And then I started to think like, am I getting arthritis? Like what is happening? And then I started to get more symptoms. My hair started falling out, and I was really, really tired, like so tired that I was having to go nap in my car during my lunch breaks, like couldn't keep my eyeballs open. The fatigue was just unrelenting. Yeah. And I started to stutter. And that is what really, really scared me. I started to get neurological issues, brain fog. I couldn't drink without choking. I started getting UTIs, rashes, and those are a lot of common symptoms, especially eczema, anxiety, OCD, depression, mental health stuff, as well as, again, the cognitive stuff is really big for people. Irritation, agitation, feeling like you're argumentative, a lot of gut issues as well, gut dysbiosis, tachycardia, tons of symptoms. I had like a whole page of different symptoms. And so what ultimately happened, in my opinion, it was a mix of multiple things. In my life previously, it's kind of like the toxic bucket theory that everybody talks about, where, everybody has this imaginary bucket and everybody's like is a percentage. Like, let's say right now mine is at 79%. So if I go move into a moldy house, then that could take me over the top, that everyday exposure to those molds. But say my husband, for instance, he grew up in the countryside, and he grew up in the UK. I grew up next to a DuPont factory. So two totally different childhoods. And so, his toxic percentage, let's just say it was like 20%. So it didn't really affect him. It took him like almost a year before he started to get symptomatic. And so, but that's kind of how I very often see it in my practice. Is usually it's the women who get sick first, or the kids as well. And usually, believe it or not, it's unfortunate. A lot of husbands are not really supportive, and they don't really believe their wives. That's one of the big problems that or obstacles that we face, is that a lot of women out there are really trying to navigate this on their own, and it's very, very difficult. But I am very grateful my husband believed me, and was very, very supportive. But yeah, there's a depending on what type of mold it is, there's many different symptoms. Obviously, respiratory is another big one. For us, it felt like at the end, our lungs were like burning, immune system suppression, neuro and systemic inflammation. And that can kind of really manifest into many things. People can get misdiagnosed with arthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, or Crohn's, or, chronic fatigue syndrome. A lot of autoimmune illnesses are associated or rooted in mold because it can be both a trigger and it can also be an illness on its own as well.
Interesting. So what did healing look like for you? Because you got to a point where you're like, I literally can't handle this anymore.
For some people, they can leave mold and, that's immediately going to give them a big kind of jump on getting better. I wasn't so lucky. Obviously, I did have to get out of mold. That was a big part of it, but I had to work on opening up my detoxification pathways because I was just completely blocked. I wasn't able to excrete any of these toxins. I was just recycling and, constantly accumulating, and that bucket was just getting higher and higher and higher and higher. So I worked with a practitioner and really had to change a lot of my diet. I had to really kind of stay away from inflammatory foods, and I was on a supplement regimen. I did a lot of sauna to try to kind of sweat a lot of this out. And it took me a couple years, actually. It's not a fast process for some people. And I was bedridden by the end. Like, I couldn't function. I lost my job. We lost our house. We threw away everything we owned. And the trauma from that was also really affected me as well. So
yeah, I can imagine. Yeah. And like you said, I would assume, like you said, the toxic load accumulation happens over time, just as I think the healing process happens over time. So would you say that for many of your clients, it's been this continual buildup, or is it usually you're seeing them at the last, at the last moment where it's the full culmination of all of their symptoms?
It depends. I think it depends on where someone is in their awareness, but most people coming to us, it used to be that people were coming to us like after they've already, remediated one or two times and it failed, and they're still sick and they're just so frustrated because they're just like, why is this not working? And everybody I talk to says they're an expert, and I just really can't heal, and please help me. And now we're starting to see a shift, especially since COVID happened, that we're starting to see people who aren't even sick at all and are more like, hey, I don't want to get sick. And, after kind of going through the pandemic and having to be in my home, there's things that I've realized that I want to change, and I kind of want to prevent this from happening. So can you teach me how to do that? And can we just evaluate the state of my home right now and kind of figure out how can I make it better? How can I make it more high performing? And how can I keep my family healthy? So it's a mix of clientele at this point.
When I was in high school, we had several freak floods that happened in our house. And then our house was struck by lightning, burned down, lost everything, was homeless for a little bit. All that to say, I vividly remember going through picture frames that I had grabbed with my dad, like that morning that we had thrown into bags. Half of our clothes was sent to some, I don't even know, mold company, whatever, that would scan our stuff. And, man, I just think back to, because this has definitely been a new conversation between my husband and I, especially knowing we were walking into military housing. But I'm thinking back, that was almost 10 years ago when my siblings and I definitely had a good amount of mold exposure, if not following us, because I think sentimentally we had taken a lot of the stuff literally out of the house. We did the good, we smell checked it, because at that point, it's the emotional high, but we were like, okay, well, they said it's either water damage or smoke damage. I'm going to smell my t-shirt that may be the only t-shirt I get to take home with me.
Yeah.
and we just took it. And 6 months later, we were trying to go through our old picture frames from my siblings and I's like baby pictures, and it was completely covered in mold.
Yeah.
So all that to say, I'm just like thinking back to, I wonder, going off of your like toxic load theory, if over time it's similar for many people where they have an instance like that, maybe their childhood home or their work environment that they're not aware of, and it just gets to a tipping point, quite literally.
Totally. That's actually one of the questions I usually ask we have like an intake form. And most of the people that we work with, this is not their first time ever being exposed to mold. They might not have known the risks, throughout their lifetime. But, when you kind of actually figure all this out, you're like, wait a minute, you kind of go backwards and say, okay, there's all these points in time where, like I said, you could have gotten, I always look at it like these percentages, and when we even, the toxic, there's a couple things that mold can do as well. Like you have that toxicity part, but there's also the inflammatory part. And for some people, a very small percentage, there's also the immune system reactivity. And so this is where you get people who become, their immune system becomes like overreactive to exposure. And this is where they get like severe hypersensitivity. And, whereas it's not so much the toxicity part, but they can walk back into a building and, immediately go into anaphylaxis or have some kind of, some kind of heart palpitations or some kind of reaction is just going to immediately happen. So there's different ways that it can kind of affect you as well, besides just, that toxicity part. And that was one of the parts that was harder for me, was just, it had affected me. Like I did have the diagnosis of mold illness, but I also had a diagnosis of CIRS, which is CIRS, chronic inflammatory response syndrome. And then because the mold that I had been exposed to suppressed my immune system, I had Lyme disease and I didn't know it. And my immune system handled it before, but now that I was just a disaster with all that inflammation, the Lyme and the co-infections just kind of reactivated and went crazy. So that we very frequently see too as well.
Yeah, man, I can't imagine what that would have been like, but I'm definitely thankful for your healing journey now and where it's led you.
Thank you. It was, it really, it was probably one of the darkest times in my life. I've had some pretty painful experiences throughout my life, but that one was, it's very saddening. I lost one of my best friends to suicide about 10 years ago. And I always had kind of been like, how could you do that? How could she do this? And so when I went through all of this experience with my family and, I understood at that point, not that I would ever do that, but I got it. And I was like, okay, when you're down like that, it's just, it's so hard to see, any kind of hope. And so that's kind of why I was so inspired to help people so they didn't ever feel like I did.
Right. And you mentioned earlier, like it quite literally has mental and emotional manifestations. Like it plays a role in anxiety, depression, like very much real neurological dysfunction.
I absolutely believe that. And I absolutely believe that for some people, and this is purely theory as well. I haven't been able to prove this yet, but I believe for some people, I think that it can even play a role in hoarding and kind of like for people who, because, people who hoard like I'm talking about real hoarders, like people who,
Right. Like the show.
Yes. And I think that, it's almost like an illness. And so there are fungi out there that can literally, there are fungi, I forget what the species is called, but it can grow into the brain of insects, into ants. And it literally takes over the mind of the ant and is guiding the ant to do what it wants. So, fungi is fascinating when you really look at it. So, I don't know. I come from this almost like with a childlike, curiosity in some ways of just, what is it capable of? And it always kills me when people don't think that extra step, when they're like, oh, just spray some bleach on it. And I'm like, are you not even thinking beyond that? Like, how dare we believe that mold is not going to react to that, like, or even communicate with its species, its family? It's kind of like we just think of it as like a thing, that, oh, that's just this thing on the wall, but it's been here longer than we have, and will surely outlive all of us. So we have to give it some respect in that way.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. It's funny you mentioned the fungi with the ants, because if you haven't heard of the new series or show, The Last of Us, that's the fungus.
Yep. It's funny. I have a book that my husband got me for Christmas, and it's lost on me right now what it's called, but it talks about it has like a whole chapter in the book about those ants. And when I started watching that, I was like, oh my gosh, they're talking about it on here. That's like really true. I was like, that is not made up. That is absolutely true.
Which is so incredible. And it just like, I think for me, it like leads you back to just the beauty and intricacy of like God's design. Like that, I never would have even thought, because I definitely thought mold was a thing, not a living thing, No,
and that's kind of when we talk about when people usually come to work with us, they're usually in a state of doubt, a state of overwhelm. They've lost trust in pretty much everybody, and they feel pretty hopeless and also scared, because this is a scary topic. I mean, it truly is, when you kind of do some testing and learn that like you possibly have a problem, and if you're having symptoms, it's really terrifying, especially when you go on the internet and you start going in some of these groups and people are telling you that you need to burn your house down and you need to throw away everything and just forget it, and oh my gosh, this is what happened to me. And it's really, really overwhelming. And so, I try to really help people kind of change their perspective about it. And while I am not a person who believes in like the no fear thing, I think that there's kind of like this trend that's happening where, everybody kind of learned about toxins and then like everybody took it overboard, and now everybody's kind of retracting and saying like, it's okay to have a Twinkie, or, I use this lip balm. And so it's almost like just funny how do you know what I mean? You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, exactly. It's like watching society take this like pendulum swing, and a perfect example of like how people interact with dogmatic culture.
Yeah.
It either is or it isn't. And then after some time, depending on what social media influencers you follow, will tell you it's okay to land somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
I think there is a season of transition that people are walking into as they think critically for themselves and make the best decisions for their family. But I totally agree.
Yeah.
There's so much fear just in this conversation. So how do you encourage, and maybe this is more so walking into what does it look like for a family or someone to like walk through the process with you as you encourage them out of this fear mindset?
Sure. So one of the first things that obviously to even begin kind of working, we have to have some kind of data to be able to kind of analyze the situation and the circumstance. When people work with us, we offer that type of testing. Like we have it on our website. That's kind of one of the first steps in working with us, is that you can do a test called the ERMI, and it's ERMI, pronounced ERMI. And most people will do that test, and then we kind of sit down and go over it together. We even have the option of saying, we'll hold on to the test if you want us to until you're, the day of your appointment. So because people get overwhelmed, it's very difficult to read. And right. They kind of look at it and freak out, and then their appointment isn't until 3 weeks. And that part can be very intimidating and scary. But my first kind of step in that is taking these really complex topics and breaking it down into layman's terms and making it very easy to absorb and very easy to understand. I am very aware, because I've been on the other side of the table, I'm very aware of who I'm working with and who my clients are, and what right. frame of mind they're in. And I've been on the journey personally. So I think that gives me a real kind of open window into understanding from a very genuine perspective, an organic perspective of how they feel. And so I really start with the education. And like I said a few minutes ago, I am not the type of consultant or coach that subscribes to no fear at all, because, right. I look at it like our bodies are divine creations, and we were given fear as a way to protect ourselves. Without fear, we would not be here. So we have to respect those things. And I think that, as we were just talking about, there's not just always like black and white, everything isn't in extremes. And part of all of this is kind of helping my clients understand what their level of risk is, what they're actually dealing with, and then what to expect. Everything we do is loosely based off of the customer timeline, or the client timeline, or you could call it like their journey, if you will. And certainly their timeline is different. Everybody has a different story. Everybody's bio-individually unique, and their homes are unique as well. And so we also try to help people understand that and understand our process. And we kind of work it into phases, because ultimately, when I look at like, what is it that I'm trying to do for people? And that's ultimately to help people get out of that state of doubt and put people into a state of feeling confident. They don't necessarily have to feel good about this topic, because, they love mold now. Right. So, and I don't expect anybody to love it or anything, but I want them to be most informed and comfortable making the big decisions that they have to make, because unfortunately, my job is not easy. It is not an easy one. I have to tell people things that they don't want to hear very often. And it takes a certain kind of person to do this kind of work, because it's very emotional. You kind of really absorb a lot of emotions with people. And I feel like I'm trained to do that. And I'm prepared to kind of work with people in this very intimate way, because we're talking about people's health, we're talking about people's homes, and even with some couples and even husbands, some families, they hold guilt almost, because it's like right. There's kind of like this association, like, man, well, if I have mold, then that means I didn't take care of my house. which is,
Mm-hmm.
not true,
Right.
not true at all. Certainly, if we were talking about somebody who's hoarding or something like that, that can certainly contribute. But generally, most water damage is not like an intentional thing that somebody did. It's usually that there's some kind of problem with the house. But we really guide people through the whole timeline and help them to find and build the teams that they need to. Because I always make this example: if I were to go into a room full of attorneys, and I'm not a lawyer. I know very little about the law, just enough to get by. And all these attorneys were speaking legalese, and my job was to discern who was the best lawyer out of the bunch, right? I would have no idea. I would struggle to try to figure out who's the best one, right? But I know if I were a lawyer, I'd be able to be like, oh, well, he's full of it. She knows what she's talking about, and that's kind of how, like what we're here to do. We're here to be like an interpreter. I'm here to share with you like the reality of the circumstances we're in, and we don't make decisions for people. We don't inspect. We don't remediate. We're strictly consultants, because additionally, there's also, currently in the industry, if you do more than one role, that becomes a conflict of interest. And, if I'm inspecting your house, then I have a financially vested interest to come back. I want you to remediate.
That's true.
Because that means I get to come back to do post-inspection. Similarly, you don't want your inspector to be your remediator, because all of those things tie together. So it's really good to have
that makes sense.
Somebody who isn't connected, that really kind of understands as a whole the entire process, because they can kind of, again, make sure that you're most informed, so that when you do get to that point and you have your inspection in front of you and it's got 15 sources on there, are you going to remediate all 15? Are you, how much money do you have? Are you working within a budget? And if you can only do some, which ones are you going to remediate? And even if you're going to do that, is it worth it? Do you know what I mean? And to try to figure all of that out is a lot for people, especially when they're sick and, they've already been burned and they feel like doubtful and just hesitant. And so we're here to really, again, give people confidence and give people education and knowledge and the reality of the circumstances. And ultimately, we're here to support people too, and to validate how they feel. Sometimes that's a lot of what people are looking for, is validation. They want to feel heard, and to have somebody hold space for them and to help them kind of get out of that analysis paralysis that they're kind of stuck in.
Before we move towards wrapping up, I'm sure this might be a long-winded question, but I'm curious if there are any other things, like off the top of your head, that you can think about, just mold exposure that we don't typically think about. So like the first thing I think of is like coffee. Like, be cognizant of the coffee that you drink or your sourcing of coffee. Like, are there any other things like that might be a baby step right now, like you said, on the spectrum, to be able to take full ownership over this aspect of their health journey, that might be just, these are some of the ways that you can take tangible small steps to be cognizant of the mold in your life?
Sure. So before I became a holistic mold consultant, and before, I completely changed my career, I was just a regular person. And when, I've been a renter my whole life. I've never owned a home yet. Peter and I are waiting to build. But whenever I would go look at a house, I would look at it from a very aesthetic type view. You know, it would be like, okay,
Yeah.
what does the bedroom look like? Where's the living room? Like, does it look cool? You know, what kind of tub does it have? Things like that.
Yeah.
So one of the most simplest kind of things that people can start to do is look at your home like a living, kind of breathing system, and understanding how it works. I know that sounds really just super simple, but most people don't ever visit areas in their house that are not like living spaces. For instance, your crawl space, your basement, your attic. Okay, those are like 3 top places. You know, they should all be clean enough to put a baby bottom, like, and most of them aren't.
Yeah, I was going to say, definitely not.
Yeah. And so that's kind of a very first thing would be try to understand your house a little bit better and how it works. Unfortunately, we're never taught any of this stuff about our homes and how to care for a house and, you know, and anything about the HVAC. That's another thing, you know, understand where your HVAC is. Where is it located? Most people think, oh, it's outside, right? And that's the compressor. That's one part of it. But there's also another part that's inside called your air handler. That is like the lungs of your home, and understanding it's one of the most key parts of your home, and actually one of the biggest spots that we see mold grow, because especially if you live in an area that, you know, you're in the more southern states, you're using your AC a lot, you know, whenever you've got that temperature differential, that's a risk. You know, always think of that soda can. Whenever you have those two temperatures meet, that's an opportunity for condensation to form, you know, and condensation, you don't want condensation in your house. Like I've had some people recently reach out and they've had condensation forming on their windows. I've even had some clients where condensation has been forming like on their outlets and things. And that's because the air, the cool air is meeting the heat in there. So, you know, kind of just exploring, kind of maybe again opening your visual to kind of looking at your house in a new way and kind of understanding that. I'd also invest in a good flashlight and a moisture meter. You can get one. We have one on our Amazon store. You can go on Amazon and just type in moisture meter and you can get one for like $30-$40 and play with it and start putting it around. You don't get the one with the pins on it. Get the one that's a flat back, and you can start kind of measuring different areas. They have different ways to like depending on what surface, if it's drywall or wood or if it's masonry, they have like different settings on there. But that can be helpful in just kind of exploring and looking at your house with a new set of eyes. Also, you know, just simple ways to kind of make certain areas healthier. I frequently see people stuff their closets full of stuff and then shut the door. And your closets need to breathe a little bit. So kind of cutting down on the clutter and maybe doing some kind of spring cleaning projects and reorganizing the closet to allow airflow to kind of flow freely. If I were to be able to show you the camera, Pete has like every single closet open. It doesn't always look great. I love the look of all doors shut everywhere, but you know, it's kind of like, you know, I'd rather have airflow in my house than to have the door shut. I do the same thing for any of your washers. Keep the door open, especially if you have a front loader, because those are really going to get moldy on the inner I can't think of the word right now. The inner gasket, the door.
Gotcha.
Those I would clean out every time, but keep your dust levels low. I probably, before I would ever, air filters and purifiers are great, but they're pretty expensive. A lot of the really good ones are. And I would say before you'd invest in that, I would say do an ERMI first to ensure that your house is good, and that, you don't have any issues before you start investing in all this machinery, which is meant to be like, let's keep my house maintained and keep the health to be improving versus it's going to solve a problem. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Which my husband and I had that conversation. So that's super helpful because, the Army dictates what house we live in and where. And they told us our house was built in the 70s. So this is no surprise to us. But our ear doctor is the one thing that I'm like mentally like, at least we have that right now.
Yeah.
But that'll definitely be our next step for us too. That's super helpful.
Yeah, absolutely.
PJ, this has been so awesome.
Thank you.
You are brilliant. This is an amazing conversation.
Thank you. Thank you.
So where can our community connect with you? All the questions, client inquiries, all of that.
Awesome. So I have built, our entire company is virtual. So we work all over the world. We have clients in Dubai, Japan, France, Germany, US, Canada. And so we've made it really super simple. You can always go to my website, which is pjharlowwellness.com, and you can book right there. I'm really big on education, so I have a pretty detailed website. We have a blog. Everything is kind of laid out. We have like a FAQ, a list of all of our different services and the different types of consults we offer, so you can, kind of gauge your circumstance and kind of see where it would fit. We have everything from a general 30-minute consult to more urgent ones, and then packages. And we also have an entire mold testing catalog. So you could test for mycotoxins, you could test for bacteria, you can test for, do the ERMI test that I was talking about. Mm-hmm. We even have a package with an ERMI and an interpretation, which is usually where most people start. But that's all built to kind of serve the community and be very easy to navigate, and you can book everything online. And we also have a pretty active Instagram, and I love my Instagram family there and audience, and I do a lot of stories there, and you'll see a little bit more of my personal life too, because I try to balance a little bit. I've had that page for quite a bit. So, but Pete and I do a lot of educational stuff and kind of share our life here and a lot of the ways that we protect our house and keep things healthy here.
Yes, for sure. You guys, I will link all of that info. Please go follow PJ. PJ and I actually met at the Freely Rooted retreat, but I had a friend that when we had, like you said, the initial mold panic, I was referred to through a mutual friend of a mutual friend that sent me your account. And so my husband and I went through all of your content, and then lo and behold, we're at the same retreat.
I know,
this
right?
is just such a fun growth and friendship.
I know. That was such a blast. That was just such a irreplaceable, or I guess that's the right word. I just feel like it was just so lovely to be around all those just wonderful, intelligent, and just charming women all together, just kind of with the same mindset. Was an experience I'll never forget.
Definitely. It was such a gift. And this conversation is such a gift.
Absolutely. So, thank you for having me.
I'm so excited to share with everybody. But we have one final question that we close with all of our guests. So if you could provide any wisdom to your younger self or community that is listening, what would you share?
For my younger self, I wish that I would have known what I know now about the microbiome. And I wish that I wouldn't have given my kids so many antibiotics, and kind of wish I knew more, about just understanding that as a whole. Like, I would have changed a lot of my decisions and not allowed a lot of the more allopathic medicine community push my decisions. Like, I had C-sections and things like that. And I really wish I would have known how to really inoculate my son with my good microbes and things, just because my kids have had a lot of health issues. And I wish I would know all of that health information. And I'd also probably tell my young self to remember that, to take care of this body this gift that we are given, because you only get one vessel. And, it's got to last a really long time. So, it's hard. That question is a hard one, because it's kind of like, there are some things I would tell myself, but that would make my life different. And I wouldn't want my life to be different, because even though I've had to experience a lot of painful things, it's made me who I am. And I'm very happy with who I am right now. And so, for the first time probably in my life. So I'm pretty content with that. So, but how about you?
Yeah. I think just from this conversation, man, I think, like you said, there's a lot I wish I knew, especially coming out of like the house fire. But because we rebuilt our home on the same lot, like we started from scratch from there. But I definitely am encouraged coming out of this conversation, because just your passion and your heart and your empathy to educate over instill fear, or at least give people the tools to be able to make those decisions for themselves, is super encouraging, because it is scary. Like, just as our family has personally navigated this over the past weeks, months, from walking into our house and then pulling the floors up, to my husband and I sitting across from each other at dinner being like, well, what did your doctor say? What did your doctor say? And similar to you being like, well, they just chalked it up to whatever and dismissed whatever. So definitely, I think this conversation has just been a wealth of wisdom and really just a beautiful encouragement in my own life right now.
Well, good. Well, you let me know if you need anything at all. I'm here.
For sure. Well, thank you so much, PJ, for this conversation. I'll link all of your info and really get that out to our community, because I know you would love and serve them beautifully.
Thank you.
So we will catch you guys on the next episode. This episode of If Only I Were Wiser has ended, but be sure to subscribe for more episodes so you don't miss any encouragement. And don't forget to rate and review, so we can continue to build our community and share more about topics that will be healing and helpful for you. See you in the next episode.